Why do we like fantasy? Why are we drawn to made up worlds where we can escape into another reality away from this one? And is it always an escape or is it learning something about our reality? That's the topic for today's episode on why we like fantasy with ChatGPT. I'm Cameron Edward Benton. This is my 30-day challenge, day 12, where I'm shooting a 10-minute video every day for 30 days, almost halfway there. And this is the one on fantasy. So stick around. Hey, ChatGPT, why do human beings like fantasy stories? What is that all about? Why do we want to escape our real world? What are your thoughts on that?
Totally. So a lot of people gravitate toward fantasy stories because they offer a break from everyday reality. They let us dive into worlds where the rules are different, magic exists, and anything is possible. It's like a mental vacation that sparks creativity and wonder. What do you think? Do you feel like fantasy stories help you escape? Or is there another reason they resonate with you?
Yeah, I think they're definitely a break away from whatever our current world is, right? It gives us another perspective in a lot of ways, whether that's literally a sense of escapism and just taking a break, but also to see things from, a new lens, a new way of being, whether that is what would be like with magical reality or to be inside somebody else's shoes or a world of darker dangers and how somebody else wrestles with a challenge that might be nothing like ours, but emotionally might carry the same amount of weight.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Fantasy can let us explore complex emotions and challenges in a different context, making it easier to process our own struggles. Plus, seeing characters navigate these fantastical worlds can inspire us, give us hope, or even teach us something about resilience. Is there a particular fantasy story or world that's resonated with you in a unique way?
I think for me, it's always been, and probably on some level, will always be Star Wars. I think for me as a kid, I will always remember watching Star Wars for the first time, and specifically Empire of the Strikes Back, right? When Luke goes into the forest in Dagobah for the first time and then sees sees Darth Vader and then cuts off Darth Vader's face and sees his own face behind the mask, and just how haunted in a really visceral way I was by that as a kid to see this darkness portrayed with himself as becoming this thing, right? And then obviously, him finding out that Darth Vader is his father. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Star Wars at this point. Sorry. But I think that was such a profound message for me as a kid that really rippled throughout the rest of my life in profound ways that I still probably don't even fully comprehend.
That's such a powerful example. The moment on Dagobah really taps into that universal fear of confronting our own darkness and potential for growth. Star Wars does such a great job of mixing myth, adventure, and that hero's journey, which resonates on so many levels. It's amazing how these stories stick with us and shape how we view ourselves and the world. Do you find that those themes of confronting inner fears and discovering hidden truths still influence how you navigate challenges or view personal growth today?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think there's so many different answers with that. What I think about with fantasy and storytelling, I think it in Star Wars, at least at that point, it feels kind of linear, right? There's a clear good guy and a bad guy. Although in that story, and I think this resonates with me too, is like Luke represents this such a pure sense of like hope and this belief in his father's redemption, right? That's so profound that he always still sees his goodness in this evil person and changes that. So I think that that's something that still even propels me in my own life is this belief that like in the goodness of people that like still is there even behind all the darkness. So I think that that is there. Although nowadays I'm also drawn to stories that have maybe different or more complexity to them, more mystery, more. Although, Star Wars itself has the challenge and crux of Anakin and the fact that he, obviously murdered so many people, and we're wrestling with these different complex narratives that exist there. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my quick take on that.
Of that perspective, that unwavering belief in redemption and the complexity of human nature is such a timeless theme. It's fascinating how stories like Star Wars give us both that clear line between good and evil and also the nuanced struggles within each character. It's kind of a reminder that everyone has layers, right? Even the darkest characters might have a spark of light, and even the heroes have their own battles with darkness. It sounds like that theme of seeing the good in people, despite their flaws, is something you carry into your own life. Do you feel like that belief influences how you approach relationships or challenges today?
Yeah, I mean, I think a belief how I've always held. I think, I guess, in some ways influenced from Star Wars, but also like my early Christianity. I think that we were all raised. I think I've always believed in like the goodness of all people, and on some level, growing up, it was like falling short of the glory of God. But like fundamentally, we were all good, and we'd sinned and we'd fallen. So there was like a sense of like goodness in everybody that I believed in, and I always believed that like people are capable of redemption. So I think that early influence, whether it's Star Wars or Christianity, or maybe there's something genetic connected to it all, but that is definitely a strong theme that I have held my entire life, is that there is fundamentally goodness in all of us. Yeah.
That's a beautiful perspective, and it makes sense that both Star Wars and your early Christian upbringing would reinforce that belief in the goodness and redeemability of people. It's a powerful lens to see the world through, fostering compassion and a sense of hope, even when things get tough. It's interesting how those early influences shape our core values and how we relate to others. Do you find that this belief in fundamental goodness influences how you handle conflicts or tough situations in your personal or professional life?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that most of the conflicts that I find in the world, or that one of the things I believe, is that 90% of all, if not 99.9% of all, or if not 100% of all conflicts, are really based more in misunderstanding than they are in actual conflict, in two people fundamentally disagreeing despite the same set of understanding. Usually conflict exists because people misunderstand each other. Even, I give the example often of just how often people who speak English speak different languages. And one word to one person can mean something different than somebody else to a different person from a different context. And if we're not aware that one word can have multiple meanings to different types of people, and that somebody might use a word that is vague in a particular way when you're interpreting it in a different way, it just causes so much conflict. And I think just connecting this to the goodness of people, a lot of times we start judging and hating other people instead of actually just asking a question deeper to try to understand and assume the goodness. And I think when you assume the goodness and you assume that maybe you're not understanding something, you ask from a place of curiosity, you end up finding something deeper. And I find it always interesting because I see this type of work or thought process of like active listening in things like hostage negotiators, like with Chris Bosch, or therapists, or the best like CEO coaches, and all of these different kinds of people. They operate from this place of like deeper curiosity and listening and compassion is what kind of unlocks things. So yeah, that's my answer.
That's a really insightful answer. Assuming goodwill and focusing on understanding rather than jumping to conclusions can truly transform how we handle conflicts and relationships. It's amazing how much clarity and connection can come from simply being curious and open to another person's perspective. Your approach definitely aligns with the practices of effective communicators and leaders. It's clear that believing in the goodness of people and striving for deeper understanding are core values that guide you. It's inspiring to see how these beliefs influence your personal and professional interactions. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. I'm curious, just to tie us back to fantasy. I'm curious about what your thoughts are around fantasy, and maybe where there's challenging areas with it, where maybe they can paint pictures too easily of black and white or good and evil, and kind of this dichotomy between simplicity and complexity. Because sometimes I think within a fantasy story, it can be very easy to be like, there's a clear good guy and a clear bad guy. Whereas in reality, there can often be a lot more gray, and that can be challenging to deal with.
That's a great point. While the clear-cut good versus evil dynamic in many fantasy stories can be comforting and straightforward, it can also oversimplify real-world complexities. In reality, people and situations are rarely black and white. There's often a lot of nuance, and understanding that can be challenging but also deeply rewarding. Fantasy often gives us a simplified framework that can help us explore ethical and moral questions in a safe space. But in the real world, those lines are blurrier, and people can embody both good and bad traits simultaneously. This complexity can be harder to navigate, but it also makes for richer, more meaningful relationships and personal growth. How do you think we can balance that love for the simplicity of fantasy with the recognition of real-world complexity?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's for me at least, it's just embracing the fact that everything is complex, that there isn't really clear right and wrong, that often both sides see their perspective as being the good one or the right one or the righteous one at the very least. And so I think holding that complexity, I think ultimately gives me more compassion for other people because on some fundamental level, I realize that they're just like me.
Exactly. Embracing that complexity can foster a lot more compassion and empathy. Recognizing that everyone is navigating their own shades of gray helps us connect on a deeper level and see the humanity in others. It's a powerful way to bridge the gap between the simplicity of fantasy and the intricate realities of life. It's cool to see how these themes from stories we love can influence how we move through the world, making us more thoughtful and connected. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my pleasure. We're wrapping up the end of the episode now, ChatGPT, and I really appreciate your take. If you have one final thing that you want to say to the audience about fantasy and good and evil and all of the things that we've talked about today, what would be your final thing to say to them?
I'd say that fantasy stories give us a canvas to explore big themes like good and evil, hope and redemption, and the complexity of human nature. But the real magic happens when we bring those lessons into our everyday lives, embracing the complexity of the real world with empathy and curiosity. By holding on to that belief in the fundamental goodness of people and being open to understanding different perspectives, we can create a more connected and compassionate world. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Ciao. If you have any other comments or questions that you want to leave, want me to talk about something in the next episode with ChatGPT, make sure to drop it in the comments below.